When we look at this building, we assume it's rectilinear. We assume that it is rectilinear and it's full of right angles, but in fact, there's hardly any right angles in this building. The Parthenon seems like a rectangle, but there are practically no right angles in the entire building. Everything is slightly off. The columns look straight from below, but they're slightly tilted towards each other. So if you were standing at the base of the Parthenon, and if the columns didn't stop after a certain number of feet, but they kept up going all the way into the sky, you would actually see them meeting each other. Uh, this is a very curious thing that builders did. There's another interpretation of these tiny deviations that these deviations gave the building a sense of dynamism, a sense of the organic that otherwise would have been static and lifeless. The Greeks had used this idea before, and our historians called this enthesis, meaning a slight convex curve in the shaft of a column introduced to correct the visual illusion of concavity produced by a straight shaft. These slight adjustments were nothing new to the Greeks, but the degree to which it was used here and the subtlety in the way it was used is unprecedented. It turns out that the Parthenon does not have straight parallel lines at all. The columns are not vertically cylindrical. They bulge by about an inch at the center of the cylinder. The human brain, looking at the column, will actually think that the waist is pinched. Your eye thinks that the center of the cylinder is shrunk. To compensate for that, the columns of the Parthenon bulge, and there's no way this could have been an accident. In the Doric columns, we can see that there is a taper, and you assume that it's a straight line, but the Greeks wanted a slight sense of organics, so the weight of the building was being expressed in the bulge. The entasis of the column is about 1/3 of the way from the bottom. Every single column bulges only 11/16 of an inch, the entire length of that column. The Greeks pulled this off by bringing column drums to the side and carefully carving the base and the top, and then carving in between. We see this slight deviation in the columns, but we also see it not only vertically, but also horizontally. You assume that the floor of the temple is flat, but it's really not. Rainwater runs off it because the edges are lower than the center, but only very slightly lower. Across the long side of the temple, the center rises only by about 4.5 inches, and on the short sides of the temple, on the east and west side, as shown in this image, the center rises only by about 2.5 inches. Here, we can see another optical illusion they implemented. Notice that the columns on the edges are slightly closer to one another than the columns in the center of each side. Architectural historians have hypothesized that the reason for this is because the column at the edge is in a sense an orphanage and doesn't have anything past it. Therefore, it would seem to be less substantial. So if we could make the column a little bit closer to the next one, it might compensate and you would have a sense of density across the building that is even. Placing of the columns closer together and the edges created a problem in the levels above. One of the rules of the Doric order is that there had to be triglyphs right above the center of a column or in between each column. But they also wanted the triglyphs to be at the very edge. And in fact, if you're placing your columns closer together, you can actually solve that problem. But because the columns were placed so close together, they have the opposite issue, which is to say that the metope at the ends of the building would be too slender, so the architects created sculptural metopes that are widest in the center, just like the spaces between the columns. And actually, the metopes themselves gradually become thinner as you move to the edges, so that you can't really even perceive the change without having to measure it. The general proportions of the building can be expressed mathematically as x equals y times 2 plus 1. So across the front, we see 8 columns, and along the sides, 16 columns. The ratio also governs the spacing between the columns and its relationship to the diameter of a column. In other words, math is everywhere. If you look at the plan of the structure, we see the exterior colonnade on all 4 sides on the east and west end. It's actually a double colonnade, and on the long sides inside the columns, a solid masonry wall. You can enter rooms on the east and west only. West has smaller rooms with the 4 Ionic columns within it, but the east room was larger and held the monumental sculpture of Athena. It's interesting that a system that was designed to create a fall that was high enough to enclosure a sculpture that was almost 40 feet high was unique. There was a huge shape of interior columns at 2 stories. They were Doric and they surrounded the goddess. The sculpture is now lost, but the building is almost lost too. Here we come to one of the great tragedies of Western architecture. This building survived into the 17th century and was in pretty good shape for 2,000 years. It's only in the modern era that it became a ruin. The Parthenon has become different things throughout history. First, it was an ancient Greek temple for Athena, and then it became a Greek Orthodox church, then a Roman Catholic church, and then a mosque. In a war between the Ottomans, who were in control of Greece in the 17th century, and the Venetians. The Venetians attacked the Parthenon. The Ottomans used it to hold ammunition and gunpowder, leading to an explosion from the inside, basically ripping the gods out of the Parthenon. Also, in the 18th century, Lord Eldon received permission from the Turkish government to take sculptures that had already fallen off the temple and bring them to England. Greece has recently built a museum just down the hill from the Acropolis with the intention to house these sculptures should the British ever release them. I can't help but imagine standing inside the Parthenon between those columns, in which we can't do today. The site is undergoing tremendous restoration. There are cranes and scaffolding that maintain the ruin and keep it from falling into worse despair, as you can see in this image. But what if we could stand there? What would it feel like? There is a beautiful balance between the theoretical and physical. The Greeks thought about mathematics as the way that we could understand the divine. But is that all the Greeks were trying to achieve? An optical illusion, or could they have had another purpose in mind when they built the Parthenon? Why do we create monuments like the Parthenon? And the answer is we want to try to imitate the divine. The divine was seen as perfection. The gods were seen as perfection, so sacred geometry has been incorporated into the Parthenon in the belief that it was charged with some kind of divine power. And this was done very specifically to connect this world to the divine, to create a connection between this world and the next. Is the unique design of the Parthenon some kind of attempt to connect to a higher power? According to researchers, the answer is yes. And they think that the fact that the Parthenon still stands today and that it still looks pleasing to the eye is a testament to what its architects were striving to build, something eternal, everlasting, and perhaps divine. There's something about the Parthenon that is both an offering to Athena, the protector of Athens, but also something that's monumental to human beings. to Athenians, to their brilliance, and by extension in the modern era, to the human spirit. Thank you for staying till the end of the podcast. I hope you enjoy learning a little bit more about Greek history and a little bit more about this building and all the interesting facts about it as much as I did. Uh, Again, thank you, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye bye, everybody.